All right, so I realize that I don't have any, okay, hello. So welcome to the Vermont Science Teaching Association's first virtual conference. We are coming from Vermont, the tribal lands of the Abenaki and the Mohican. If in the chat you wanted to just introduce yourself, your name, where you're coming from. I know that we have a lot of folks that are going to be joining from not just Vermont, but from across the country. We were very intentional when we decided to start our conference on equity and integration in science education on Martin Luther King Day, because we really feel that the way that we're approaching equity and equality really merges with Dr. King's, fight for racial justice and equality. Some housekeeping. So the Zoom links that were sent out in emails, that is the Zoom link that you're going to be using throughout the conference. And the presenters, we've asked them to share their resources in the chat. But the Vermont Science Teaching Association, the VSTA, is going to be reaching out to the presenters to collect resources, and we're going to find a way to compile them, whether it's on a Google Drive or whatnot, and then we're going to send it out to the participants through the email that you guys use for registration. Any questions or concerns, you can email me. I'm the liaison to the VSTA. My name is Margaret Carrero-Bly. I'm the science specialist for the Vermont Agency of Education, and I will drop my email address into the chat. Just some norms. We want to encourage thought-provoking discussion and discourse. We want you guys asking questions when you need clarification. Connect with each other through the chat. Honor yourself. If you have to go to the bathroom and go get water, go get a slice of pie, do it. You take care of yourself. But we just ask that you think, and I use that acronym THINK, before you engage in discourse. So think to yourself, is it thoughtful? What you're about to say, is it helpful? Is it innovative? Is it necessary? And is it kind? So now I'm going to turn it over to Christina, who is our treasurer, and she will be taking it over. So go for it, Christina.
Okay. I thought you were going to say I was your treasure. I was excited about that.
You are my treasure.
Okay. Well, we're a very small group here so far. So I'm going to have this be a relatively short introduction. I'm really excited to have Okhee Lee be part of this, to be the kickoff for this conference. We had hoped to have her come to Vermont pre-COVID times in person, and this is our next best, and we hope in the future to invite you in for an in-person presentation. Okhee is a professor at the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development at New York University. She's really known for her work around promoting science and language learning for all students, and was part of developing the NGSS standards, and served as the leader of the NGSS diversity and equity team. Her research involves integrating science, language, and computational thinking with a focus on multilingual learners. Her latest work focuses on justice-centered STEM education to address pressing societal challenges. She's actively involved in the work of the National Science Teaching Association, parent of the VSTA. My personal deep appreciation for her as a scholar and a research stems from the fact that she intentionally stays grounded, working directly with teachers and pre-service teachers and their students, and is committed to unabashedly amplifying her voice at the highest levels of policymakers. And that's just such an important aspect of her being. So welcome, Okhee Lee.
Good morning, everybody. It's my honor to be here. And thank you for your kind introduction, and everybody. So I see some friends here, and I am going to share my thoughts, particularly on this important day we're moving toward, and we all understand that it's a very difficult time that we are going through. Could I say something very personal? This is my personal thinking as an immigrant. So I'm going to start with, you can see my hesitation, but I'm going to say it before I move on. When there is a normal time when we consider all strive, but when there is something that people typically think of as a challenge, and as an immigrant, I say, if this is a challenge to most people, it could be an opportunity for me to shine and make a difference. So what people may think of a deficit or a challenge is something that I consider as an asset or an opportunity that I leverage. So for that reason, I stay focused and try to do what I can. I hope I'm making sense to you. So that's my personal thought. It's a time to really make a difference when we all face. All right, here we go then. I would like to talk about the science and language with all K-12 students, including multilingual learners. And when I say multilingual learners, I do mean that it applies to all students. And I would like to just think and talk relatively fast so that we can get to questions and discussion later. So here is how science and language is integrated. People really do like the idea of mutually supportive of each other, that they go together. When I say multilingual learners, I mean all students. And these are some of the topics that I would like to address, to think about what I just said of asset, not a deficit. That Okhee, who is from Korea, who does not speak English, that is a limit. But if you say that Okhee, who comes from Korea, who brings multiple ways and multiple views and multiple cultures and multiple languages, that is an asset. So we are going to flip it from what I don't have to what I do have. Then we are going to talk about science and language integration, and then using science curriculum as an example. And then I hope that I have time to talk about the WIDA English Language Development Standards, a framework, and then see, oh, wow, science and language actually do go together as standards and policy that we work together. So here is a topic one of asset-oriented framing. I just wanted to capture some key ideas about what we mean by deficit versus asset. So as I use myself as an example, Okhee, who does not speak English, then you are already marginalizing me because I don't speak English, to Okhee, who speaks Korean and learning English and multiple languages and multiple cultures, then you are affirming my asset that I bring resources. The same thing about the culturally marginalizing Okhee, who does not understand how the society works. She understands the different ways. I'm becoming much more aware of BTS too. But do you know BTS? A Korean pops group and all that. Maggie, your child may know. I'm kidding. So how the shifts from deficit to asset may look like. I'm using the student population that we used to call limited English proficient students, and that's according to No Child Left Behind. If you remember, wow, that was over 20 years ago. Life has changed. We used to call students as a limited English, and you can see that it's already limited, that you do not speak English. We already have the norm and reference, and if anybody does not follow the norm or reference, then you are limited and you are deficit. Then it changed it to we did not like limited, so culturally linguistic diverse. That was a little bit too open and nebulous, and then came English language learners as a replacement of a limited English. And I was just so delighted when every student succeeds act of the federal policy picked up by English learners, the students are learning English. Now you can think of English learners as either a glass half full, that it's not limited anymore, a glass half empty, that it's still students are learning English. And then people did not like students learning English and not recognizing their home language. So then came emergent or emerging bilinguals, and people didn't quite like that either because it's a bilingual. What about multiple languages? And it's emergent. Emergent typically is always about level 2, beginning and emerging, and we didn't like that either. So multilingual learners is the current term. Even though I consider myself a policy person, and English learners is the policy language, I use a multilingual learners so that we push the field. And I hope that multilingual learners is the term that we are going to use in the near future. So we have come a long way from limited to multiple languages. It's the same idea with a culture. So when you think about the science and STEM, when I started my research in 1992, the first year, people thought that, what do you mean that language and culture have anything to do with the science? Because the science is language free and culture free. That was only about 3 decades ago. It's hard to imagine, but it was only 3 decades ago. Okay, you're speaking Korean, you're speaking something about STEM, language and culture, I don't understand. To now we realize, then we realize, oh, culturally different. This is where, you know, whether it's a color free or color aware, that's what the discussion started with. Culturally congruent, culturally responsive, and culturally relevant is Gloria Lesson-Dillon saying that when we say culturally relevant, it is academic achievement, it's a cultural competence, but also being aware of a social injustice as a part of a culturally relevant, which provided the way to think about it's a culturally sustaining, that I wanted to sustain my backgrounds. And then now we are saying that indigenous ways of knowing and being, and there are multiple ways of knowing and multiple ways of being. And then some people may say that when the system is not working, we may need to abolish the system and start over. So we have come a long way from language and culture have nothing to do with the science to we need to rethink about the system. So we have come a long way. And I'm saying from my life experience of only about 3 decades, that's how far. So given that we are doing the asset-based, what we mean by the assets and resources, I would like to cover quite broadly of science and language at the policy level, at the theory level, and at the practice level, because they all go together. I would like to just say that I am more and more committed to policy. And this is what we mean by that it's a systemic. Individuals can do so much as individuals, but it is the system that enables individuals, a system that limits individuals to do. So knock on the door to make a difference and take a seat at the table saying, we are here in the decision-making process, not just the receiving. So I consider all these things as really important together. Now, when you think about the science, so we do have a K-12 science framework and science standards, and I was a part of the NGSS, so I'm pretty familiar with the science standards, and I will say later about the English language proficiency standards. Those 2 documents provide the way that we think of flipping it. It's so traditionally and contemporary. Traditionally, scientists and teachers defined this is a science knowledge, and students, you must learn science the way it is written in textbooks. And some students like you made a sense of the science and became scientists and science educators. But science did not make sense to a lot of students, including English learners at the time, limited English proficient students, because science is typically written in books and I don't understand. Now, the science standards flipped the traditional to contemporary. This time, we made sure that this is all students. Put it all students making sense of science and designing solutions to problems as scientists and engineers do. And it's students are scientists and engineers doing science and doing engineering. Now, all students. Now, what does that look like? In terms of English language proficiency standards, this is something very important about the understanding of the language community. According to ESSA, it will say that English language proficiency standards, it's a little bit like a science standards. So the language proficiency standards have these things, and there are problems here, and I will say more. It says English language proficiency standards are aligned with the challenging state academic standards, including science standards. And what that means is that we don't learn English before coming to science. Content standards are part of learning language. That's the policy. If anyone says you have to know the vocabulary first before coming to science, no, according to policy, learning vocabulary is a part of a learning content, because the vocabulary is a part of a learning for all students, including multilingual learners. So think of this policy, and that's our ammunition. Now, how does that go to theory in terms of science and language integration? Traditional view. So we are learning science content, and we confirm science concept through lab investigations. That's what knowledge is, and it's a knowledge as a given. The contemporary view is that students are using knowledge and what knowledge does to do science and engineering. That's a flip. If we flip science, we flip language too. How? When you think about learning language before, we learned the grammar and vocabulary, and then we applied. This time, we are not learning vocabulary and grammar. Instead, we are using language for a particular purpose in a particular context, because I need the language to communicate. I need the language. So this is what language does, but it's using language. So we don't do knowledge as a given, but language as a given. We use the knowledge, whether it's a science or language, because I need it for my purpose. And that changes the authority. It's not the teachers or the books, but it's me, the students, that I need it because I need to know. So here is a theory, reimagine. We think of a vocabulary as a precursor because, okay, you don't speak English, you have to know it. The grammar and vocabulary, not so. I'm using language and then I learn language as a product of using it. It's a flipping it. Another way to think about language is that when you think about language as reading, this is how literacy is such a bully. That you have to know how to read and write, and it might be correct. In the past, when science is written as a given body of knowledge. But when you think about using language, even before doing science vocabulary, not as vocabulary as a reading comprehension as a basic block. When you ask a question, when you debate, when you argue, when you explain, that is a language. So language is a much broader. Now, beyond the language of reading, writing, in addition to speaking and listening, when you think about the diagrams, tables and charts, Maggie, when you think about the coding and programming, that's all communicating, and that's using language for communication. It's a much broader than what ELA thought of reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Now, one more thing, because Okhee does not speak English, we simplify language, and by simplifying language, we simplify content. While you may not understand that I have a very good ideas, so instead of simplifying content and simplifying language, please amplify so that I can do both. Okay. You don't need to support me, and you don't need to protect me from what? Challenge me. just like any other student. So if I have not said anything this morning, it's amplify, it's the asset. Work with me from what I have. Don't define me as what I don't have. All right, let's continue that. Policy and theory guiding that in 2018, there was English learners in STEM subjects, and that is refining while English learners are also part of science and STEM. So what does it look like? And here is combining the document together. Now, when science educators and STEM educators typically think of a multilingual learners, the typical response in the past was, I don't speak Korean, I don't know how to communicate, or I don't know the L strategies, so I don't know what strategies to use. Well, put that aside. You are teaching science, you are teaching STEM, and what are you teaching? Science. So what does that mean? I'm starting from the phenomena and problems, just like any other student, because I'm teaching science. And as the students are making sense of phenomena and problems, they are doing display practices by asking questions, by arguing, by explaining, by developing models. Now, as they argue, that's where they comes in discourse, because Christina and I'm arguing. I'm arguing, okay, I'm explaining, and that's where the discourse comes in. When you think about the discourse, I'm interacting with Christina. Maggie, your son is interacting with Osmos. Interacting, it could be others of the teachers and other peers and computer programs and all the others. And now we are interacting through some discourse. Now we'll get to registers and modalities, and you may say, okay, I don't know what they are. That's all right. But as a science teacher, we're starting from phenomena and problems. We don't start from how language works. I leave that to language educators. Do you see it? We are starting from science, the discipline, and then we'll get to the fancy language of the evaporation of water in contact with a cold surface that condenses the water vapor. I mean, where it drops, and then when they become, that's what language looks like in textbooks. But to get there, students have to understand that water evaporates. That's a tough concept. The water vapor condenses. Without understanding that what is written in textbooks means nothing. We get there, but not in the beginning. So we'll say a little bit about the phenomena, practices, and interacting with others using discourse. Right, here are the practice. So we are getting into practice of science shifts. Science is in a great place, and I'm so appreciative of science framework and standards. And I see John. John, we have 45 states that either adopted or made adaptations, including Texas, and we may have a couple more states. And at the end, and thank you, John, for being the 45th state after waiting for the adoption process. Now here is in science, we explain phenomena and problems by engaging in three-dimensional learning of a blending. Now, by now we say SCPs and CCCs and DCIs, and understanding develops over time. That's a science in a nutshell, in one sentence. When you think about the practice of a language, here is a language. So I know that you are saying, probably I use a sentence frames and sentence structures, and I know academic language, and I do walls. They are important strategies, but they are all important strategies needed. But we would like to think of a language somewhat differently, about using language to do more than sentence frame to do the grammar right, or sentence structure of to following the grammar of a sentence. What do I mean by that? So here is a linguistic, right now, think of how I use a language. Am I talking? Yes. Am I using text? Yes. Am I using drawing? Yes. Am I using symbol? Right here, arrow is a symbol. Am I using table? Right here. Am I using gesture? Yes. So when I smile, I mean I'm happy. When I'm sad, I have, it's all these gestures. What modalities do I use? Linguistic and visual. How many? All of them. Why? because I need them to communicate effectively. The reason I'm saying is because the ELA defines language as only linguistic, which is very limited. In science and math and computational thinking, can you imagine doing anything without doing visual? This is why disciplines are so important. Now, register, you may say, I don't know what that means. Register means pretty much how we use a language to do something for a particular purpose. And in school setting, we think of register from everyday language to specialized language. So what do we mean by that? Everyday language of ew, it stinks about smell. Specialized, wow, smell is made of something. So it is everyday to specialized. What is the most important is a precision, precise idea. Idea really matters first, and then language comes later. If you have nothing to talk about, and if you don't have any idea, you have nothing to talk about. Now, here are the interactions. So we use the language very differently in different types of interactions. When you think about the one-to-one, Maggie, you whisper. When you do one-to-small, you become a little bit more explicit about what do you mean. When you do one-to-many, you have to be very explicit of the beaker, the particles. And when you do in writing, you have to be really, who is he, she, it? When you do small to many, so it's all about explicitness. When you are in a small setting, it's right here and now, and you don't need to be very explicit. But when you are beyond here and now, you have to be, all right, very explicit. So here is a doing science. These are science shifts and language shifts, no correspondence, so simply that we do have a shift and shifts. Now, again, sentence frame and sentence frame structure, and they are important, but only when we have ideas to talk about first, all right? Now I'm looking at the time and it's 9:30, and I'm choosing between Christina. I have examples of the curriculum, and I also have the WIDA standards. Which one do we want it to go? WIDA standards or example? You are muted.
I don't want to speak for everybody, but I would like to go to the WIDA standards.
All right, Maggie, may I go to WIDA standards?
Don't ask me. I'm not the of course, you could do what, yes, you do what Christina wants, because I do what Christina wants.
Thank you. I do have a very, it may take about, but I would like to start with the WIDA first, and then we may go back to the examples if I have time. Because the WIDA, just like when you think about the science standards, have changed. And the reason I would like to talk about the WIDA is that if, I know they are all good things, right? If your colleague says, but that's not the way we do, now you can say, no, English learners also have changed. So here is a WIDA standards. And you can see that, Christina, do you see the bottom of the screen? How do I stop this thing? I always have a problem with that. Okay, it has a northeast region, and when you see it, just to let you know, Vermont is WIDA standards.
Yes.
So here is the ammunition of how science standards and WIDA standards are aligned, and they go together, mutually supportive. What does it look like? I would like to remind you that according to the ESSA standards, it says that every student, including multilingual English proficiency standards, are aligned with. So the WIDA standards really flipped as much as the science standards are flipped. And this became released on December 18th of 2020. So it's 2021. It's 2020. It's a very recent, right? So recent. WIDA previous standards were done in 2012. When you think about it, science standards were not released at the time. So the previous WIDA standards were based on the previous standards, and it makes sense, right? So just like a science standards, WIDA standards became 2020, 2012 was the previous standards, and the current standards were done in about a decade later. Christina, am I speaking? Am I communicating?
Yes.
It's a policy in plain English. There is nothing magical about it. All right. So the standards were, it'll say the language of science. Keep this in mind. It has standards were social and instructional, language of the science, language. The language of mathematics was the same as the way we thought of the science written in textbooks. The language. It is a defined, but the language of science. What does that mean? What is written in books? So there's the language of, there is a vocabulary, there is a grammar. It's a written, the language of, defined as a given. And here is a WIDA standards in the past of 2012 before. I didn't understand, and I scratched my head for a long time until I sat down and decode the fine print. So it'll say something about the language of mathematics. Common Core standards for mathematics is a grade 4. That's the standard. In science, we say that all standards, all students. Now, instead of doing all standards for math, it changes to example context for language uses, build models for posters. You may say, why do you change this standard to an example? Right? I didn't understand. And then there is a cognitive function. So this will, it becomes apply. I thought the standard was that, but now students are applying. And there is a cognitive function. Now, when you look at the apply across levels of English proficiency, that apply becomes some students a label, like me, because I don't speak English yet. Some students are define, describe, compare and contrast, explain, and then when you reach level 6, you apply. And I say, oh, because I don't speak English, I do lower cognitive level. So you think I'm not cognitively capable. So I draw, I color, sitting in the back of the room. And when you think of, when they thought of language, it's all vocabulary terms. So if your colleagues say that we are not ready, that's not the way we do. This is the past. Christina, I could not understand why. Why? Okay. Here is a WIDA standards new. And WIDA starts with multilingual learners. They went beyond English learners. And they said students who bring multiple languages. Do you see that it is asset-based? Multilingual learners. And then there are 4 big ideas. It's a little bit like discrete core ideas and big ideas. So equity, integration, collaboration, and functional approach. Those are 4. In terms of equity, it's a can-do philosophy. Can-do philosophy applied, but in the past, it said that because on level 1, okay, you cannot do science until you learn basic English. This time, okay, you speak Korean and you're learning English and you can do the modeling and diagrams and all that. Join us. So I can, this time I can do in science. I can, right? Integration of a content and language. That's a second big idea. It's a multimodality, just like a multiple language is a multimodality. It is not just a spoken written. I can use maps, equations, images, and symbols, and diagrams, and charts, and videos, all that. So English, that I'm learning English, it does not limit me from participating in science because I can use multiple modalities. Do you see it? We invite all students using multiple modalities. Multimodality allows all students to use. Now, what is important is that even though this is about multilingual learners or English learners, this approach also applies to students with language processing difficulties, students with limited literacy development. It's wide of all students. Okay. Here is a collaboration. Collaboration is really important between content language teachers. And then here is this. Language is not about the learning language as a given or what language is. It says language is choices we make with the language in many purposes. So we are using language to achieve our purposes. It's using language, not learning language. So it really flipped. You can see how the science flipped and language flipped in a very comparable ways. So let's go through a couple of some details of what does it look like. I hope that you are excited when the WIDA standards say it also impacts ELA too. I bet that the next generation of ELA standards will be way broader than the narrow ways of doing it now. Remember that used to be that the language of science, this time it's a language for science. We are using language to do science. Hey, it flipped. It's not the language of science, language for science. And this is different from what it used to be. I'm using language to the science and flipped. So what I say, we are using language to the science. Well, how do I use a language? And WIDA decided to use practices that cut across ELA, math, social studies, and science. So in ELA, narration is important. I think it's a ELA in respect of inform, so you can think of informing the procedures, but also inform others of. But there is argue and there is explain that cut across ELA, math, science, and social studies. So right now, WIDA standards are organized around these four practices. Using language when students engage in argument, using language when students engage in explanation, using language, using science to make sense of, using language to communicate. So what does that mean? That it used to be reading, listening, and speaking as a basis toward reading and writing. But this time, there is a viewing to interpret the information. Representing, so you can think of models and diagrams, all the visuals. I use a model to explain, but I use a Christina model to understand what Christina is trying to communicate. It's a much broader, multi-modality.
Right.
Okay. Now, when we say language, it is not just the vocabulary, so this is a vocabulary. Okay. Here is a sentence frame and structure so that I write it grammatically. Discourse is how words and sentences are organized into a paragraph and beyond. But all these things happen, elements of a language happen in social, cultural context, because I need the language for my purpose. Social, cultural context, like in science, we communicate ideas at multiple levels. Fascinating, isn't it? What we used to think of the elements up is no, up and down. Like that. Okay. So WIDA standards are written all in terms of, now the students are doing explanation in science. As the students are doing explanation, what is language and how language is used. So WIDA standards are all organized by word, sentences, grammatical, and then discourse of how ideas are organized, how ideas are coherent, and how dense the language is. Like that water evaporates is not dense, but evaporation of water in contact with it, that's density. But it'll get there. But it'll get there, but not in the beginning. Grammar, when we say precise ideas and precise language, vocabulary is needed at the end, later on, but not in the beginning. So it's all WIDA. And I leave this to language educators to educate me, but I'm good so far, okay? So remember that before this time, WIDA is organized by only language. It's not about the cognitive function. Because I'm equally capable while I'm learning English. I'm equally capable. It's a language. So WIDA standards are all organized by word, sentence, discourse, and level 1 through level 6 are all determined by language proficiency, not cognitive ability, not my knowledge of the science disciplines. It's a language, right? So this is, when you think about it, this is proficiency levels are defined by language. Compare this with the previous standards, which was that because I don't speak English, I label and I color. Not so. I'm doing any other student using multimodality, using multiple languages. I hope that you get goosebumps. And this should apply to all students. All right. So here is compare the differences between WIDA and what do you think of the main impact? All right, Christina, I have 5 minutes before we open up. So I'm going to go to the curriculum. Ready? In 5 minutes. I think it's so exciting. The reason why it's so exciting is because I say it, I caused some trouble with the WIDA standards. So I caused some trouble with the science standards and WIDA standards. And I'm just so grateful that the field is moving. So here is an example for 5 minutes, and we still have 10 minutes of a discussion. So bear with me. Now, when we combine science and language with a focus on multilingual learners, but applies to all students. Here is an example of it. This is what it takes of a science and language and science, and multiple disciplines working together. Here is the famous garbage unit. And the garbage is a local, but it also is universal. By the way, given the societal challenges of climate change and COVID and pollution and all of that, I have been advocating recently on that we should not stay only the sanitized phenomenon in the classroom. We really have to dig into the societal challenges in life that broaden the role of science and STEM broadly. Because when we think about pollution and COVID, those societal challenges impact certain groups more than others. And the groups that are disproportionately impacted are the minoritized groups. So that's a whole different discussion, but I'm just going to stay on science and language today. So here is a three-dimensional learning. Students are sorting the garbage in the classroom, the beginning of the class. Now, when the students are sorting, they are doing their thinking without ever using a word of a language. Because it's what hands are doing is an extension of what she's thinking. Now, when they sort, they are doing patterns of food and non-food, solid food and liquid food. They are looking at patterns. When they do the food and non-food, they are looking at systems. They are already doing what we call what? Cross-cutting concepts without ever using the terms. Because that's what they think. Patterns and systems are part of. Here is, yeah, the same, they may say, it's an everyday language because they are thinking. Let me get the ideas first. Now we say that science and language practices are language intensive. Here is what I would like to challenge all of us. When we say something like intensive or something adding, we already think of intensive as a challenging and demanding. Well, when I said something about if it's a challenge to many people, it could be an opportunity for me. Well, using language could be an opportunity to learn language rather than challenge. Flip it. Students are using language by using multiple modalities and using multiple languages. It's an opportunity. Then here is the building. This is what I consider also very important. I use the word flip, the common plain English of a flip. Remember in the past that we used to do, these are the standards, and we confirm the standards by doing lab investigations. And if we have time, let's apply. This time, we don't do that. Here are the phenomena. I need the science discipline ideas to explain the phenomena. Because I need the ideas to explain. So here is, we're doing science, and then here is after the banana and the orange have decomposed. All right, what's the smell? And here is doing science using language. And using language, put sentence frame, sentence structure aside. Let's just do language, and because I need it. Here is the beginning of a lesson cluster. Let's do a little bit of, allow me 1 or 2 minutes. Let's do a little bit of language. So here is where the dishes are. Here are the snacks and cafeteria where all the food is at, fruits and pizza and salad. These are all labels, description and labels in terms of language, describing, using mostly label, this, that, in the beginning. I know as a science person, students are labeling using descriptions. And then when we ask them about how do you smell pizza, the student drew smell is like lines that come toward me. But that makes sense because I smell and smell comes like that. After about 2 weeks of that classical experiment of the balloon and syringe and fat simulation, here is at the end of lesson cluster, about 2 weeks. The students did garbage and smell, banana smell, and orange and banana are under the soil. We were just so surprised that we just thought that all the particles are the same. But the student made the distinction of here are the banana something particles. Here is our orange smell particles. Here colors mean, because they are different substances. And here is the symbol, arrow, moving randomly. I think it's so cool, closed system. And when you open it, the particles move freely and reach my nose. But this is where I say science teachers stop and ask students to explain in writing. Because the student has the idea, it's a time to use multiple modalities, write, so that we can see particles are moving freely, and that's our smell. That's what we would like to see. Now here is, so register, yikes, it smells. Here is, yikes, it stinks. So here is not simplifying language, but amplifying language. If it stinks, is it something or nothing? It is something. Is it solid? No. Liquid? No. What is it? Gas. Oh, smell is something and it's a gas. We are amplifying. If it is a gas, why can't we see it? Oh, we cannot see gas. but it is something. Why is that? So we do all the classical experiments, and classical experiments are really important because with those classical experiments, we demonstrate core ideas, and we need a classical experiments, not because we need a chemical reaction core, but because I need a chemical reaction to explain the smell, to explain. So we would that, and the smell is a gas made of particles. Before we do they say, gas is made of those tiny, tiny little things are too small to see, those tiny, tiny little things are too small to see, and students will say, how do you call them? We call them particles. Oh, smell is made of particles, too small to see. And then smell is gas made of particles, too freely to see. And that's from everyday, yikes, it stinks, to wow, smell is gas made of particles. And it changes over time from everyday to specialized over time. And this is pretty much the what does it look like in writing. So student wrote, smell travels freely and the wind helps it to get more spread out. That's good. You can't see smell because its particles are too small to see. Exactly what we were expecting in the PE. It needs a little bit of a spelling and maybe organized differently, but the idea is absolutely there. This is a time to improve language. So if students are using language like here is it, you have to be much more explicit. And if I wrap up, this time students are explaining phenomena and they are using science disciplines. And that's where students end with the end. You see how the modalities, lots of modalities, registers, water and air particles are trapped inside the microbes that break down food. Particles are too small, you can't even see them. They use registers in science. And interactions, this time I put in writing, so I have to be very explicit. And they learn all those things using multiple modalities, using specialized language, being very explicit. So I will stop, and we have only about 5 minutes, but I hope that makes sense. Question, comment?
I'm going to invite folks to unmute. You want to start your video to ask questions. I mean, I'm not in the classroom at this time, but this is so amazing. Oh, I think it's transformative. It feels transformative.
Dr. Lee, this is Adrenaline.
Hi, Ellen. Please call me Okhee. I go like Shakira.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be in this presentation. You just don't know how happy I am. It is because I'm doing my dissertation. I'm actually doing my defense next week, and it's about English learners, strategies for English learners in the implementation of NGSS. So I'm so glad that I'm here now in your presentation. My question is, I use the framework for English Language Proficiency Development Framework by CCSSO, and I use that in my dissertation, determine about the language tasks that teachers implement in their classrooms. And this is based on survey and interviews. So I didn't go to their classrooms just because of the pandemic. And one thing that I found out was that there's more of the language tasks, the linguistic tasks, like the receptive and productive tasks that were implemented more than the analytical tasks. And I know that, one of the limitations of my research is because, I use interview, and ask the teachers what they're doing, and most likely that they were not able to show or tell me the analytical tasks that the students were involved in. Because as I said, my research showed that teachers engage the ELs more on the language tasks, which is the productive and receptive. My question is, since I found that as one of maybe weaknesses for science teachers teaching English learners. With WIDA competencies, do we also have anything that could, that could help our teachers to see how our English learners from different levels, level 1 all the way up to level 6, in terms of analytical tasks and in terms of language tasks?
You mean analytical task of the academic content and language task? Is that how you're defining it?
Based on CCSSO, the language tasks are the productive and receptive tasks. And the analytical tasks are the tasks that they use in order to develop the knowledge and the concepts.
All right. I think you're going to continue after you finish the dissertation, you're going to continue your study. Because of this flip of a WIDA, so CCSSO might be using more previous thinking. This time, the way I would interpret is that we used to think even the ELA Common Core, the students are the listening and, listening and, the speaking and listening are the precursor toward the reading and writing as a step, or receiving is the precursor to producing, or you do the model, the visual as a precursor to reading and writing language. We have these blocks of a precursor. What WIDA is using and what science is using is that there is no structure of you do this as a precursor to. You actually use multiple modalities and multiple ways of communicating as needed so that you get to the higher level. So this time it's much more what we mean by the social cultural context, or the using science, using language to do science, or using science to explain why. It's a much more fluid rather than something is a precursor to. Like we used to do this reason. You need to learn language to the science. You need to speak and listen to the read and write. You need to do the receive before doing the producing. You need to do the visuals, the diagrams to do the written or language. No, it's much more flexible. So I would like to ask you to continue your study, say, I used to think, but I think differently, because that applied to me. If someone says that I like your work, I have to say, you mean before the standards or after the standards? And if someone says, oh, the one that, 2010, I say, oh, I was limited because I did not know better. Now I know better. Continue your study. It's really fascinating. And it is, you said before and after.
Right, because the ELDP framework, when I was reading that, it was sort of supposed to be something like what we need to follow in the implementation of NGSS. That's why when I found it, I'm like, okay, this is a really good instrument for my research.
Great. I'll be happy to see how your dissertation comes out. Do we have one more question, possibly, Maggie, before we end?
Thank you, Dr. Okhee.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking, just in terms of what we're doing in the state right now, we're working with something called connected literacies. So we're really talking about, this movement towards what does it mean to be literate? And what does it mean to be content literate? And so we're trying to connect those. And one of the connected literacy pieces is an understanding that literacy and numeracy are the basis for other content literacy. So I'm trying to think, and one of the things that kind of came out through the presentation was, I feel like I really need to look at WIDA and bring those standards into not only science literacy and how we at the state are defining what being scientifically literate is, but also pushing that out to the other content specialists, especially like ELA and math, saying, we are looking at what does it mean to be equity literate and mathematically literate and ELA literate, and how English language literacy is separate from literacy with a big L. And so there's a lot of things that are going on. Can you help me?
Maggie, okay, because we used to think of reading and math, literacy math as the basics. Again, it's a flipping. This is the authority and science comes after. Well, we are flipping it. So a couple of things that are important is one, English language development standards used to be junior to ELA because it's in the language family. Junior, so it's always learning English. And so students do not have English, and then limited English or English learners do not have English. So it's a two-step limitation of you don't read, but you don't have English. They're both. This time, the English language development standards go beyond the ELA standards by saying it's a multiple languages beyond English. And it's a multiple modalities beyond speaking, listening, reading, and writing. So I say ELA standards, way to go. It's multiple languages and multimodality compared to English language arts of speaking, listening, reading, and writing, and conventions of a language. Maggie, so thank you for saying that. It flipped the power dynamics between ELA and ELD standards. That's one. The second about discipline literacy. We had a discipline literacy colleagues who are very concerned and committed to literacy and reading and in science and social studies. And I would like to use the term that David Pearson, who would say that reading and literacy are bullies to content areas. So when we should be the buddies of content areas. Even when people who said that may still say it's a literacy, I don't know the content. And that's understandable because science standards are different. So I don't know content, but the way science was done is read about and write about. So this is what we are still approaching. Well, when science is different, then literacy in content areas, discipline literacy is different. You have to know the disciplines first so that you can do the literacy. You cannot do the other way around. So my colleague, the Nell Duke, who was the advocate of discipline literacy, she has been doing literacy in social studies. And Maggie, do you know how she starts the discipline of social studies? Project-based learning. In project-based learning of the social studies, this is just social studies, a discipline, and literacy plays. So we should approach the same way of the science in problem-based, project-based, place-based. Science disciplines are. It's not reading and writing anymore. No, literacy will come later as a Sunday best, but not in the beginning. We are not starting from reading and writing. We are starting from doing science. Right. Maggie, I'm still thinking about your son who is doing coding.
Yeah.
He knows nothing about how to read and write about coding, but he does coding, which is he's more literate than you in coding.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So bring it. You have to know discipline first. And the discipline of science this time is ... And how does literacy serves? Thank you. Ray, I see you on the screen and you are very intrigued.
I am. I agree with you.
Well, thank you.
I think when students are engaged authentically, everything else sort of comes after. It's like a genuine interest, inquiry, and also relevance. I think nature sort of takes over, and all those other challenges that students have, the students apply themselves to overcome. Instead of, it's sort of like an analogy would be like if you're a coach of soccer, football, you just have the students play, and they usually don't know how, and they're messing up, and they're just running around having fun. And then when you bring them over to talk to them, their eyes are wide open and they're ready to receive all the information. It's kind of flipped, like you said.
It flipped. So I'm thinking that, if I may say, adults are bad because we think we know. Experts are bad because I'm the expert. And authorities are the worst because I created a body of knowledge and this is really important. Therefore, you should, because you are limited. But instead, this is how I have come to be, and this is what it takes. Show me what you got, and I'll work with what you have. And it's a flipping it. And I cannot emphasize enough of. So high school students walk out of the buildings because adults don't understand what we need, and you are messing our health. We didn't think about it.
It also follows the story arc. You can't, like if you're reading a book, you can't come out and divulge the end of the story right in the beginning. You can't start off with the students, okay, this is what it is. It has to be intentionally withheld a little bit to create mystery and create intrigue. It's also kind of like the movie Karate Kid, if you're familiar with this, like, where the kid has a problem and he's getting bullied or what have you, and then he goes to the teacher to learn. The teacher doesn't come to his door and say, all right, this is unit 2. This is what we're doing today. And the kid's like, I don't know if I really want to know it. And the teacher's, this is really important. It's not so much. And a lot of times the students are great, and they have utmost respect mostly, and they'll take it in. But unless they really wanted it. And in science, when you reach a level of research, you are discovering, you do want to know it. It is fun. You are excited. You're fine with making mistakes because it just kind of leads you to where you want to go. You have a purpose. And that's where we have to, keep our eye on the student. And again, wherever they are is fine. If you really believe that, because they'll be fine. As long as they're interested in, and they want to, and the joy, there's joy in discovery, right?
Yeah.
And then also there's even other layers to science. You're contributing. It's the discovery that you make, you're contributing to a conversation that others are also putting together. So it's like a mosaic. You're adding your voice to others to create the truth about nature. Pretty good.
Beyond the science, I will end with this inspiring story of a STEM educator at the elementary level gave the problem of, what problem would you like to solve? And she was just, didn't know what to do, because the second, third, or fourth grade students all came up with the problems of what would you expect a student to like to solve? The first one would be, Maggie, what do you think the second graders will say? I would like to solve the problem of COVID, climate change, pollution.
Those are heavy.
So they're heavy, right? So the teacher at the elementary level says, what am I going to do? Am I going to say that this is too heavy for you and I'm not going to go there? Or because you wanted to solve the problem, I go with your problem. And Ray, what decision do you think she made?
The student's problem.
Student problem.
Hopefully.
All right. And being mindful. She found a couple of things that there were just transformative for her. One, many students chose COVID and climate change and pollution. Two, students wanted to help. I wanted to build my PPE station because my parents had come from essential workers after work. And she studied with a mask holder. And her friend, the second grader, said, because you have a mask holder, why don't you develop the whole PPE so that everything is in one place? So she put the sanitizer and mask holder and all that in one PPE. And so she did the same thing with the third, fourth, and fifth. And one project that Maggie, in response to you, she was just flabbergasted and impressed that a fourth grade student used Python to develop the measures of the emotional measures. She said, I couldn't even understand how to interpret it when my fourth grade student did. So we need to really rethink differently of what kids do not know or what you are limited to, what you are capable of. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity, and we are over time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is great. And it is recorded. So people can come back to it and take a look at it over and over again, because it was really inspiring. So I'm going to stop the recording.